Ghana's Cape Coast Castle was once the last stop for thousands of enslaved African people before they were forced onto ships to North America, never to return. More than 400 years later, some of their descendants have come to rediscover their roots as part of Ghana's Year of Return Heritage Tourism campaign.
We believe that by having that experience of walking through the dungeons, seeing the punishment cells, walking out of the door of no return, the exit to the slave ships, it all helps in the healing process.
The campaign aims to unite the descendants of slaves around the globe through the stories of their ancestors. Ghana also hopes it will boost its tourism industry. More than 500,000 tourists are expected to visit Cape Coast this year. That's compared to 380,000 in 2018. Most of the visitors are expected to come from the US. The campaign is hoping to bring in $925 million in tourism revenue. Some African Americans are also visiting another historical site closer to home. The first enslaved Africans were brought to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. That was the start of 250 years of slavery in the US. It was followed by decades of legal racial segregation, and its effects are still felt in American society.
Inequality is so striking even today that has its roots in what began here hundreds of years ago. That's something we need to be aware of to tackle it.
Slavery may have been abolished, but rights groups say it's taken other forms, including the exploitation of migrant workers. According to the Global Slavery Index, G20 countries are importing more than $350 billion worth of goods produced by forced labor every year. It says with more than 40 million people as virtual slaves worldwide, the fight to end slavery is far from over. Laila Humairah, TRT World.
Esther Stanford Koze is a historian and founder of the International Social Movement for African Reparations. She says while people commemorate the abolition of the slave trade, they shouldn't forget that the enslavement of African people began long before their journeys to North America.
This anniversary gives us an opportunity to examine history and the history of African enslavement in the so-called Americas, and more importantly, the legacy of that history. However, historical dates and anniversaries that we choose are also very political in the sense that this date of 1619, as much as it gives us an opportunity to re-examine the impact of history on our present, it also obscures the wider history of the African presence in the so-called Americas, and the fact that this wasn't actually the first time that Africans were enslaved or supposedly brought to the Americas via slave ships. So this commemoration actually obscures the deeper and longer history of African enslavement in the Americas by the Spanish in particular. And that's something that we also need to interrogate, because otherwise we have a false starting point of Africans' contributions to developing the so-called Americas, and also we don't learn sufficiently about the resistance. So many people may not realize that there was a rebellion in 1526 of African people who had been enslaved by the Spanish prior to them being enslaved by British or English colonial North America.